Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, Israel unveils a new defensive missile capability. And with conflict breaking out in Ukraine, the U.S. approves a deal to sell more tanks to Poland. Plus, analysis of the evolving situation as Russia moves troops across the border onto Ukrainian soil, and more U.S. forces are ordered to the region. And want to create a better soldier? Trust your gut. We learn about new research into using live bacteria in troops' digestive systems to help them stay healthy. And finally, developing tech to help troops get updated information in the field when they're on the move in austere environments. It's all that and more on this episode, with news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon. This is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. First up this week, with the fast-moving escalation of hostility by Russian forces in eastern Ukraine and more U.S. troops on the way to Estonia, Latvia, and the Baltic nations, the picture in the region has grown more complicated. Defense News Weekly's Daniel Woolfolk spoke with one expert on some of the tactics Russia is using as it presses troops forward.
The Russian military is quickly fielding new unmanned systems into its ranks. To learn lessons from recent conflicts, and a new paper out of the CNA Russia Studies program shows how Russia tested unmanned systems in places such as Syria and how those lessons could play a role in its conflict with Ukraine. Joining us now is co-author of the paper, Samuel Bendit. Samuel is an adjunct senior research fellow at CNAS and an advisor to CNA's Russia Studies program. Samuel, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Give us a little bit of a snapshot of where Russia is with its unmanned systems.
Over the past decade, the Russian military has invested heavily in the development and the procurement of different types of unmanned and autonomous military systems. I should also include a small caveat. Russian military likes to use the words autonomous, unmanned, and robotic rather loosely, especially when it comes to military journalists writing those articles in Russia. In fact, most of what Russia calls autonomous military force is in fact remote controlled military force. And so over the past decade, Russia invested heavily in the development of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Russia today has probably the second largest UAV fleet at around 2,000 different types of UAVs. Most of them are for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition, or ISTAR. Some of the UAVs are now becoming combat capable. Russia is starting to acquire a small number of combat UAVs. Overall, most of the UAVs in Russian service today are ISR capable and are remote controlled and can provide coverage at up to 200 kilometers for its operators. Russian military also operates a number of unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, mostly in the demining and unexploded ordnance clearance capacity. And Russia is testing and fielding a number of unmanned maritime systems, unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, and unmanned surface vehicles as well, some of which are starting to become also combat capable as Russian military seeks to locate and destroy mines underwater and on the surface.
And the Russian military has had years of practice of basically lab work. Tell us where they've actually developed this technology.
Russian military used Syria as a military laboratory. It claimed officially that over 300 different weapon systems were tested in Syria beginning in 2015. Every senior Russian military officer across all of its services has rotated through Syria so that the Russian military command today has the knowledge and capacity of fighting this type of conflict. And when it comes to using unmanned aerial vehicles, Syria was truly a watershed for the Russian military. it was able to field multiple ISR models at once that operated at different distances. At any given point, up to 70 UAVs were operating in the air, covering a very wide area in Syria. And so Russian military today thinks of UAVs as absolutely essential in any type of combat. And we cite Russian military officials in our paper stating so.
Are most of these drones they're using built in-house, built in Russia, or are they importing anything?
Today, all of its drone force is manufactured in Russia, and the Russian Ministry of Defense is actually asking its military-industrial complex to manufacture not just the airframes, but also the military electronics, the sensors, the optics, and everything that goes inside a UAV. So this type of import substitution is a very important policy that was imposed in Russia after the sanctions in 2014 and 2015, and today, the MOD actually requires its industrial companies to field a capacity that would have essentially over 50% of components manufactured in Russia proper.
It sounds like they've become highly capable. Do you have any insights on how they might plan to use this technology in Ukraine?
Well, I think if the widespread military conflict breaks out in Ukraine, they're going to use these UAVs in a similar capacity to they use in Syria. We actually note that in our paper. So these UAVs are going to become an essential part of Russia's reconnaissance fire and reconnaissance strike contour. There will be electronic warfare UAVs. There will be target acquisition UAVs that will guide artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, other ground-based and aerial assets at the Ukrainian targets. And with so many UAVs in Russian military service, they can actually bring a very significant capability to this Ukrainian fight.
Well, Samuel, that's a lot to think about, and we're going to see how this plays out. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now for Defense Dollars. Israel said on Monday that it successfully tested a new naval rocket defense system, intercepting a series of threats in what officials called a key layer of protection against Iran and its proxies in the region. The Sea Dome system is a naval version of the Iron Dome, which has been used to shoot down rockets fired from the Gaza Strip for the past decade. The Sea Dome is being installed on Israel's latest generation corvette warships, which protects Israel's coastlines and offshore natural gas assets in the Mediterranean. The test simulated a number of incoming threats, including rockets, cruise missiles, and drones. That's according to the Defense Ministry. The Sea Dome is to become part of Israel's multi-layer missile defense system, which includes weapons capable of intercepting everything from long-range missiles to short-range rockets. Moshe Patel, the director of the Israel Missile Defense Organization, labeled the test, quote, another historic milestone for the Iron Dome.
המיירטים השמידו אותם בדיוק מושלם. הצלחת הניסוי מחזקת עוד יותר את הביטחון שלנו במערכת וביכולתה להגן על שטחים נרחבים ונכסים אסטרטגיים של מדינת ישראל.
Ron Tavor, who leads the manufacturer Rafael's naval efforts, said the test passed Israel Missile Defense Organization and Israeli Navy requirements.
בסדרת הניסויים הזו הודגמה היכולת ההנדסית המתקדמת של רפאל בפיתוח ושילוב מערכות ימיות ברמה הגבוהה ביותר.
And the test comes at a time of heightened tensions. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah militant group launched a pair of drones into Israel aerospace last week, and Iran is believed to be close to signing a new international nuclear deal with global powers that will give it relief from crippling sanctions. Israel opposes the deal and fears that Iran will divert newly released funds to proxies like Hezbollah. Israel and Hezbollah fought a month-long war in 2006. During that fighting, Hezbollah fired a missile that struck an Israeli warship. Hezbollah has made no secret that it would target Israel's gas platforms if fighting were to break out. The State Department approved an estimated $6 billion sale of the M1 Abrams tanks and other equipment to Poland, and this comes as Russia's aggressions towards Ukraine increase. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency notified Congress of the potential sale last Friday. Poland has requested to purchase 250 General Dynamic Land Systems manufactured Abrams tanks, as well as counter-improvised explosive device systems, combat recovery vehicles, and joint assault bridges. As part of the deal, Poland also plans to buy 276 M250 caliber machine guns, 500 M240 Charlie 7.62mm machine guns, and in January, top Republicans in Congress pushed to accelerate the proposed sale. Polish officials have said that they expect the first delivery of the tanks in 2022, while the manufacturer of the Abrams tanks, General Dynamics Land Systems, said the deal could take 2 years to close. And around the world, as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine gets underway, NATO allies are focusing their training on potentially imminent tactics. Members of the Norwegian army honed their gunnery skills during live fire drills in Lithuania last week. NATO says the Leopard 2A4 main battle tanks are from the 2nd Battalion Brigade North, which is currently assigned to NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group, Lithuania. The Leopards were joined by CB-90 infantry fighting vehicles, and together, 2 platoons conducted combined tactical maneuvers. Now, this isn't a reaction to Russia's actions in and around Ukraine. The Army deployed for its 11th iteration and has been supporting the battle group for 5 years. However, the Norwegian Army has announced the deployment of 60 additional troops to the unit. And that's it from the defense role this week. When we return, new research into turning bacteria into an ally on the battlefield, and the latest headlines from around the military.
Welcome back. When it comes to creating better soldiers, the folks in Army research leave no stone unturned. Up next, Daniel Woolfolk is back with a story on how the force is looking at probiotics as a way to improve soldier health in the fields.
We hear about probiotics and gut microbiome in commercials for Ensure, for all these yogurts, cheeses, milks. How does it help the soldier?
That's a great question. So that's the exciting thing about the gut microbiome, which for anyone who doesn't know is that the community of thousands of trillions of bacteria living in our gastrointestinal system. The reason why we're so interested in it is because we know that what we eat can influence that community of bacteria, and that bacteria has a wide impact on our health, anywhere from gut health to our immune functions and even our cognitive function. So what we're interested in is whether we can tap into the potential of the warfighter gut microbiome using nutrition-based interventions in this example to optimize warfighter performance under stressful conditions.
And what specifically, in terms of benefits, do you want to get from this bar?
From this bar, which contains nutrients that are meant to feed those good bacteria, what we're trying to do is see if we can shape that community so that there are more beneficial bacteria that can help warfighters perform cognitively. In this example, we're bringing volunteers to a simulated high-altitude environment. So we're hoping that this bar and shaping the community can help them think better at high altitude, perform better in terms of work performance, as well as feel better in terms of gut health. So in high-altitude environments, unless you have an opportunity to acclimate to a high-altitude environment, you often feel sickness. So we call that acute mountain sickness. You might feel nausea, headaches, symptoms that are often related to the gut. So we're hoping to reduce those symptoms through the gut microbiome using this targeted nutrition-based strategy.
And does this introduce probiotics into the system, or does it feed the existing gut microbiome?
Great question. So this bar is made up of what we call prebiotics. Prebiotics are the foods that feed those bacteria, the probiotics, as you mentioned. So this bar is made up of nutrients from foods that we are familiar with, such as blueberries, cranberries, cocoa, and green tea. And so we want to feed the bacteria that are already in the gut to help promote the growth of beneficial bacteria that can potentially optimize warfighter performance.
And what's the timeline? Should someone start snacking it halfway up the mountain, or is it something that's going to be introduced to the soldier days, weeks, or even months before?
We still have a lot to learn. In this specific study, we're giving it to our volunteers for 2 weeks before we bring them to a simulated altitude condition. In a separate study where we're looking at the effects of providing a nutrient on performance under psychological and physical stress, we provide that nutrient for a month before our volunteers undergo a weighted ruck march and a simulated friend versus foe decision-making task.
And what have you seen in terms of how the prebiotics here are feeding the existing bacteria in people's guts? What kind of results have you gotten? So what are we seeing in terms of using prebiotics to feed the existing bacteria in terms of benefits?
That's a great question, and we're still learning, but what we know is that a healthy diet that consists of fruits, vegetables, and all these prebiotics, such as what we put in the bar, can stimulate a healthy gut microbiome, and it does that by promoting the growth of beneficial bacteria, and also promoting the growth of a diverse microbial community. So we know that the more diverse our microbial community, the more beneficial it is. So by providing these foods that the bacteria like, we can stimulate the growth of those good bacteria and and this can help improve the health of people who are taking prebiotics, potentially warfighters specifically when they're in the field.
You've done studies at Pikes Peak, Colorado, and high altitude. I think it's 14,000 feet. Mm-hmm. Anything surprising?
Yeah, one of the surprising things that we found is at Pikes Peak, it looked as though volunteers actually had an increase in what we call gut leakiness, which is essentially when bacteria can move in and out of your gut more freely than they should be. And so what we're doing now is seeing if we can feed beneficial bacteria through a nutrient snack bar like this, send volunteers to a simulated high altitude, and potentially reduce that incidence of gut leakiness, which might be associated with some of the symptoms of acute mountain sickness like nausea. So we're hoping that we can, again, shape that microbial community so that warfighters perform better at high altitude because of reduced incidence of this leaky gut syndrome.
Do you have to consider who the soldier is? If it's somebody who maybe grew up in Colorado versus somebody who grew up in San Diego at sea level, that they might have a little bit something different inside of their gut?
Yes, definitely. There might be differences in gut. A lot of that is shaped through diet. So different regions in the US eat different foods. But at high altitude, if you're acclimated to high altitude, so if you're born in high altitude conditions, your body is already sort of primed to be able to handle a high altitude condition. So in our studies, we're looking more at people who are not already acclimatized to high altitude conditions and are more likely to suffer from acute mountain sickness. And what we want to know is if we can somehow prevent or lessen that incidence of acute mountain sickness through this nutrient snack bar.
And speaking of the nutrient snack bar, can you tell us about the bar itself?
Yeah, so this was a bar designed specifically to target the warfighter microbiome. It's about the size of a standard energy bar. It tastes good, and we designed it so that it'd be easy to carry in the fields. And as mentioned, it's made of nutrients from familiar foods like blueberries, cocoa, green tea, and cranberries, which are foods for bacteria.
Well, thank you so much for having us over. This looks like a really exciting study. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what some of the results are along the way.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Daniel. And in more news from around the service branches, the Coast Guard has been making waves recently. First up, want to see what $1 billion of cocaine in pot looks like? Images posted by U.S. Coast Guard Southeast recently showed the fruits of seizures by the cutter James. Pictures and video showed rows of pallets of drugs sitting on a pier in Port Everglades, Florida. The haul weighed more than 70,000 pounds and came from a series of 23 drug smuggling vessel interdictions. And coasties from the same region staged an arresting rescue of a fisherman bitten by a shark. A crew from Air Station Miami airlifted the man from the back of a boat with his arm covered in bandages and a tourniquet. The 51-year-old was rescued from waters near the Bahamas and flown to a hospital in Miami, where he was listed as stable. In the Navy, an officer and 4 senior enlisted leaders now face non-judicial punishment in connection with the leak of shipboard video showing a January 24th crash of an F-35 trying to land on the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson. The video shows the jet hitting the ship's deck and sliding the length of the carrier before falling into the sea. The names of the sailors have not been released. An investigation into the cause of the crash is ongoing. In other Navy news, the force has announced the launch of a new joint fleet of unmanned drones to patrol waters frequented by Iranian vessels. The Bahrain-based U.S. Fifth Fleet said 100 floating and submersible drones are being added to the area in an effort to increase surveillance. The commander of the Fifth Fleet said the drone forces hope to be launched by summer 2023. And that's it from around the military. When we come back, Navy Federal's personal finance expert talks about how to avoid check fraud, and later new tech to help troops get faster information in the fields. Welcome back. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack talks about how to avoid fake check fraud. Take it away, Jeanette.
An unexpected check shows up in your mail and it says you're eligible for a cash prize or you're getting an inheritance. Ever heard of free money? Not likely. So instead of trusting that you're the exception, trust that it's probably a fake check and the pathway to a scam. Nearly 500 million checks like this are sent to Americans every year. To beat the scammers, you need to inspect the check. Do you recognize the sender? If you don't, that's a red flag. Do a quick search online to confirm. See if the check has the right features, like a signature, a bank address or logo, watermarks, or a padlock icon. If it doesn't have these indicators, it's not real. If you've already deposited a check that could be fake, do not spend the money. Just because a check clears doesn't mean it's legit. The bank has to make the money available for you quickly, but it can still deem the check as fake after the fact. And if you spent the money, you may have to pay it back. In this case, free money is never free. Be aware. And if you think you've got a fake check, you can report it to the FTC by going online to ftc.gov.
Thanks, Jeanette. To get more of our coverage, head on over to Army, Navy, Air Force, and MarineCorpsTimes.com and DefenseNews.com for the latest headlines. And sign up for the Early Bird Brief to get the latest news from around the military and defense world each weekday. Plus, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And subscribe to get updates on live events and breaking stories. And when we come back, faster information to troops in the field? Can't turn that down. It's the latest from MilTech on how it's getting done. Welcome back. For troops on the move operating in austere environments, getting information to create things like maps and clear communication lines is crucial. In this week's MilTech, Todd South explores the updated networking capability and a new system that can help fend off drones.
So as the Marines get after a new kind of fight in the littorals, they have to make some technology upgrades to make that happen. One of them has been around for a while, but is getting some changes, and that's networking on the move. Essentially, being able to move and transmit data or download and upload data to a cloud. In the past, you'd have to stop, make yourself vulnerable, stop forward progress on any kind of mission set or patrol. But now, they can move through obstacles, do their mission set, vehicle on the ground or vehicle in the air, and still do that data transfer that they need to do. The original technology fielded in about 2013 with the Marine Corps, but now they're adapting to new systems, putting it on the MV-22 Osprey, for example, on the KC-130J, and also on ground vehicle and amphibious vehicles, such as the amphibious combat vehicle and the soon-to-be advanced reconnaissance vehicle, which is still under development. For example, back in August, Marines with 3rd Marine Regiment in Hawaii did testing with the networking on the move on the MV-22 Osprey. It was the first time those Marines had used that system in that platform. So although it's been around in some formats, such as ground vehicles, implementation in the air side and other assets is a new development for the Marine Corps. Another technology upgrade is a newer system that's getting a different kind of look at how it's being used, and that's the MADIS and LMADIS, the Marine Air Defense Integrated System. The LMADIS is a lighter version of that same system. So the LMADIS was mounted on Polaris Razor all-terrain vehicles and used in CENTCOM just a couple years ago, specifically in Syria, kind of filling gaps with air defense detection and intercepts. What they're doing now is trying to improve the intercept, or basically the missile, thing that's going to strike any target, be it a drone of a hobby-sized drone or a larger scale drone at a higher altitude, for that LMADIS and the MADIS system. And so the new intercept they want is to take out, in a cheaper way, in a quicker way, small hobby-style drones, things used often by terrorists or other types of groups, to thwart different types of radar systems and present a new threat to Marine units and Army units out in the field. So the Marines want a cheaper and ready to go, prototyped and operationally tested interceptor for that system that's been around about 3 to 5 years. They've asked for that very recently. They want some things delivered to them just in the next few months. So we'll see kind of where they get after that, because it's a lot cheaper to send a smaller type of intercept to a smaller type of drone than it would be to send a big honking missile after every little thing that crosses your path. So both of these pieces of technology basically are trying to make Marines' lives easier, especially in conditions where they don't have a lot of support. So networking on the move allows them to get data to upgrade and update their maps, update and upgrade the reconnaissance and intelligence that's been provided to them, and also provide that to higher command. You know, the MADIS and LMADIS are small unit air defense. You know, the Marines and the Army really got out of the air defense game for a couple decades because there really wasn't much of an air defense threat in COIN operations and counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now that changed over time with small commercial drones, but it's increased quite a bit with the great power competition that the U.S. is entering with Iran, China, Russia, North Korea. All those countries have pretty sophisticated air attack abilities, and if we're anywhere near their borders, we're going to have to face that. And obviously the Marines are going to be prepared for that if they have the right kind of equipment, technology, and training.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.